was a short period in my life when I lived completely alone for the first time. Before that, I had lived with my parents and later with my girlfriend, so silence was never something I was used to. Then I moved into a small apartment tucked beneath someone else's house, and suddenly the nights felt heavier, longer, and too quiet. I spent most evenings by myself, filling the silence with movies, mostly horror movies, which in hindsight probably wasn't the best idea. Even at 21, I would feel uneasy after the credits rolled. That strange, lingering tension that follows you when the lights go out. Sometimes I'd reach behind me and switch on the lamp just to scan the room again, reassuring myself that nothing had changed while I wasn't looking. One night, though, something felt different from the start. My neighbor's car was gone, the driveway empty, the street unusually still. Yet I began hearing footsteps outside, slow and deliberate, moving somewhere close to my door. The sound didn't belong to any specific direction. It echoed through the narrow hallway that connected my room to the rest of the house, making it impossible to tell where it was coming from. My nerves started shaking, a cold tension spreading through my chest. After a few minutes of trying to ignore it, I forced myself out of bed and walked toward the door. When I opened it, the hallway stretched out ahead of me, dim and silent, with the bathroom at the far end barely visible in the low light. Nothing moved. Nothing breathed. I stood there listening, convincing myself I had imagined it. Then about an hour later, I looked up again and saw a figure standing at the far end near the kitchen, completely still watching me. I couldn't make out a face, only the shape of someone staring in my direction. And then it started walking toward me. I didn't think. I just screamed and ran back into my room, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. I didn't think. I just screamed and ran back into my room, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. And for a long time, I stood there with my back pressed against the wood, listening for footsteps, waiting for the handle to turn, expecting something to test the barrier between us. But nothing happened. Only the faint hum of the house settling and the distant sound of pipes shifting somewhere behind the walls. And slowly the silence became worse than any noise, because it forced my imagination to fill in the gaps, and I kept telling myself it had to be a person. Maybe someone who had come into the wrong apartment, or someone playing a prank, because the alternative felt impossible to accept. Yet the image of that figure moving toward me replayed over and over in my mind with a strange precision, the way it walked too evenly, too smoothly, like someone learning how to walk by copying someone else. And after several minutes, I realized I was still holding my breath, so I forced myself to inhale slowly, trying to calm down enough to think clearly, and I grabbed my phone with shaking hands, debating whether to call someone, the police maybe. But what would I say? That I saw someone in my hallway and then ran away without confirming anything, and as I hesitated, I noticed something else. The silence outside my door felt heavy, almost expectant, like whatever had been there was waiting for me to do something next, and that thought alone made my stomach tighten. So instead of opening the door, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at it, listening carefully, counting seconds as they passed. And time stretched strangely, minutes feeling longer than they should, until eventually exhaustion began to creep in, and I realized nearly an hour had passed without any sound at all, and that was when doubt started creeping in too. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe the shadows had shifted and my brain filled in the rest, because I was already on edge from watching horror movies alone every night. And slowly curiosity replaced fear again. That dangerous curiosity that makes you question your own memory. And before I fully decided to do it, I found myself standing and walking toward the door, my hand hovering over the handle as if it belonged to someone else. And I paused long enough to listen again. Nothing, no breathing, no movement, just silence. So I turned the handle slowly and opened it a crack, expecting resistance or movement on the other side. But the hallway was empty, exactly as before. The dim light casting long shadows toward the bathroom at the far end, and I stepped out cautiously, my bare feet cold against the floor, scanning each corner carefully, and the air felt different, colder somehow. Though maybe that was just my imagination, and I walked all the way to the kitchen, checking behind doors and around corners, but there was no one, no sign of intrusion, nothing moved out of place. And yet the feeling of being watched didn't fade. If anything, it grew stronger, as if something unseen had retreated just beyond my perception. And that was when I noticed the clock on the microwave flashing, resetting itself repeatedly, as if power had flickered briefly, and I remembered the neighbor's car missing, the unusual quiet outside, and for a moment I considered leaving the apartment entirely, driving somewhere else for the night. But something held me back, maybe stubbornness or disbelief, and I returned to my room, locking the door behind me, leaving the lamp on, deciding I would stay awake until morning. But sleep came anyway in brief, restless bursts, each time interrupted by the sensation that someone was standing just outside my door. And when morning finally arrived, nothing looked unusual. The sunlight felt almost mocking, turning the events of the night into something that seemed less real, and I convinced myself stress and isolation had played tricks on me. Yet, that certainty didn't last long, because the following night I heard footsteps again, softer this time, slower, and instead of panic I felt a strange familiarity, as if the house itself had begun repeating a routine. And I stayed still, listening, trying to determine a pattern, and after several minutes the footsteps stopped exactly outside my door, and there was a pause, long enough to make me hold my breath, followed by a faint scratching sound like fingertips brushing against wood, and I froze, unsure whether to respond. And after a while the sound faded, replaced by silence again, and I realized that the fear now came not from sudden shocks, but from anticipation, from waiting for the next moment to reveal itself. And over the next few nights, the same sequence repeated with slight variations. Sometimes the footsteps would stop near the bathroom instead, sometimes near the kitchen, but always ending with that same heavy quiet that felt like a tension. And I began noticing small changes around the apartment too. Objects slightly out of place, doors not fully closed when I was certain I'd shut them. And at first I blamed myself, assuming I'd simply forgotten, but the pattern continued until I started taking mental notes before bed, tracking where everything was positioned, and still the changes happened. Never dramatic enough to prove anything, but enough to unsettle me deeply. And one evening I returned home to find a chair in the kitchen angled toward the hallway, as if someone had been sitting there watching my room. And I stood frozen in the doorway for several minutes, debating whether to enter, feeling like I had stepped into someone else's space. And when I finally moved the chair back, it felt wrong, like interrupting something mid-conversation. And that night I avoided watching any horror movies, thinking maybe removing that influence would calm my mind. But the footsteps came anyway, louder than before, pacing slowly back and forth outside my door. And for the first time, I noticed a rhythm to them. 3 steps, pause, 3 steps, pause, repeating over and over as if following a rule. And I lay there counting unconsciously, feeling my heartbeat sync with the pattern until it suddenly stopped, leaving a silence so complete it felt like the world itself had paused. And then there was a knock, not loud but deliberate, a single tap that echoed through the room. And I stayed completely still, remembering how opening the door the first time had then led to that figure approaching me. And after a few minutes, another knock came, followed by a faint whisper I couldn't quite make out, and my name seemed to hide somewhere inside the sound, though I couldn't be certain. And the urge to respond was strong, almost magnetic. But I resisted, covering my ears until it faded, and when morning came, I felt both relieved and unsettled, because ignoring it seemed to change its behavior, and that realization began shaping my actions, turning each night into a quiet experiment where I observed how the sounds reacted to my choices. And slowly, I noticed that when I remained calm, the disturbances stayed subtle. But when I reacted with fear, they intensified, becoming closer, more direct. And that idea disturbed me deeply because it suggested intelligence, or at least responsiveness, and weeks passed like this, each night introducing new small details that expanded the mystery without ever revealing an answer. Reflections in mirrors that felt delayed. Shadows lingering longer than they should. The faint impression of someone standing just outside my peripheral vision. And one night as I walked down the hallway, I caught my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. And for a brief second it didn't match my movement, remaining still while I continued forward, and I stopped immediately, turning back slowly. But everything appeared normal again, and I convinced myself it had been a trick of light, though the unease remained long after, and as time went on, I began to feel less like an intruder in the apartment and more like part of an ongoing process, as if the house and whatever moved within it were learning my routines while I learned theirs. And sometimes I wondered whether the figure I had seen that first night had been observing me for much longer than I realized, waiting for me to notice it. And recently, the footsteps have become quieter, almost gentle, and I no longer feel immediate panic when I hear them, only a cautious awareness. And sometimes I sit on my bed listening, feeling like there is a presence just beyond the door that understands I am aware of it. And last night I woke up to complete silence. No footsteps, no sounds at all. And for the first time, that absence felt more unsettling than anything else, because it felt like something had changed, like the pattern had reached a new stage. And I lay there waiting, wondering whether the quiet meant it had finally left or whether it had simply moved closer, waiting for me to open the door again.